Chapter 27. Finding of the Ku'ula. It was Wednesday morning. Mr. Johnson got up early and told his wife to make breakfast. He told Domingo to check the pickup truck and to see if there was enough gas and oil and check the air in the tires. His wife gave him some money to buy the things written on the list. Mr. Johnson then went to the lighthouse to check a few things and to see if everything was in order. He then walked to the pickup truck and asked Domingo if everything was in order, and Domingo said everything was ready. They got in the pickup truck and started on their way. As he was riding, Mr. Johnson looked at the odometer to see when it registered 1 mile. Then he said to Domingo, "Drive me up the hill and leave me there. I have some business to check here. It will take time, but you go and pick up the supplies and take the list of things that Mrs. Johnson wants. Just take your time and do not rush, so I will have plenty of time to do my work, because it is important to me. If you come back about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, that will be plenty of time." They arrived at the top of the hill, and Mr. Johnson stepped down from the pickup truck. He went to the back to take the instrument to check his bearings and the log book. Domingo took off, and Mr. Johnson began to walk to the mound, surrounded by a stone wall below, a distance of about 50 yards from the road. Where Domingo let Mr. Johnson off was a wide road that led to an old trail along the shoreline to Honua Po. He climbed over the stone wall and stopped at the mound. On the side of the mound was an opening just big enough for one person to enter at a time. Before he started to go in, he looked around to see if this was the only burial cave. Mr. Johnson left the instrument and the book outside and took his flashlight and began to walk into the cave. He was kind of frightened and imagined a lot of things that he might encounter. From the entrance to the main chamber, a distance of 10 feet. There were several places he had to stoop down in order to go ahead. This was the result of earthquakes that caused the rocks to roll down. As he reached the main chamber, it was like a big living room, about 40 feet wide and by 20 feet long and 15 feet high. As he flashed his light around, he noticed 2 tunnels that led further in. At the entrance that led to the large chamber, he tore a piece of red cloth and dropped it on the ground so he would know how to get out of the cave. For a minute, he made a thorough search with his flashlight. He decided the big living room had been the meeting room. Heavy lauhala mats lay on the ground. On the 4 walls, 3 feet high from the ground, there was a built-in stone wall about 2 feet wide. On top of each stone wall sat 3 stone bowls filled with kukui nut oil. He lit a match to see if the oil would burn. It took a little while to get a good yellow flame. He lit 3 bowls, and the light was bright enough to see what there was to see. Standing in one corner, there were 7 spears of kawila wood and a war helmet with feathers, still in good condition. There were a few shark's teeth clubs lying on the mats, and 2 small round bamboo baskets filled with small pebbles, and a few slingshots lay next to them. He counted 6 mallows with red and yellow feathers glued and woven together lying on the stone wall. In another corner was a roll of fishing net still in good condition. He looked around to see if he could spot where the ku'ula was kept. He examined the room, top and bottom, and was sure it was not kept there. He then picked up one of the stone bowl lamps and moved to the next entrance and walked a distance of 10 feet. This tunnel was made so that only one person could walk in and out at one time. He stopped at the entrance of the next room, put the lamp down, and tore another red cloth and placed it on the ground. He picked up the lamp and walked into the second big room. This room was twice the size of the first room. Half of the room was elevated. The high part was covered with lauhala matting. This was the burial room. The bodies were laid out in rows, with the heads facing east and the feet west. The covering over the bodies was scanty and full of dust. Only the skeletons remained. At the end of each corner where the skeletons were laid was an oblong wooden box with a cover. He stopped to see what was in one box. He had an eerie feeling, and the sweat was running down his forehead, but the thought of finding the ku'ula dominated all other thoughts. The box was heavy, with no lock on it. He tried to lift the cover with one hand while holding the light with the other, but it was impossible, so he put the light down and used both hands. As he picked up the cover, the dust began to evaporate around him, and the light became dark. He stood a while, holding his breath. There was a giant skeleton in the box. He must have been 7 feet long. The skeleton was bigger than any ordinary man or woman. When the dust settled, he saw a black and porous object held in the skeleton's right hand. It was in the shape of a cone. The bottom part was about 4 inches and the height 6 inches, with the top conical shape of 2 inches in diameter. This was the ku'ula that he was looking for. He stooped and took the ku'ula in his hand and said, "Now I know I have something, that my dream has come true." He stood there and looked at the rock and began to feel as though something was telling him to take it. But his plan was to leave it and pick it up the next day. He walked to the outer entrance, quenching the fires in the bowls as he went along. He picked up the red cloth and put it in his pocket. He emerged from the cave and picked up his instrument and book and climbed down the stone wall, then walked to the trail and sat down. He looked at his pocket watch and saw that it was about 2 in the afternoon. He had been in the cave about 6 hours. Looking over the plain, he saw a pickup truck heading toward him. In just a few minutes, Domingo drove up. He asked him, "How was everything with you at Naalehu? Did you pick up the supplies and also the things my wife wanted?" Domingo said he had done everything on the list. He then asked Mr. Johnson, "How did your instrument check with the wind reading every hour?" Mr. Johnson replied, "Not bad. At times, the gusts ran up to 50 miles per hour. I think we should have a cable to hold the lighthouse. I will write the home office and explain the reading. They will send someone out to check. I think we are safe for the time being." This instrument was just to divert Domingo's mind.